This is Political and Economic Change in China, Objective 3, about how China transitioned from Maoism to the eventual practices that they are following in the modern day. Now, I want to go back to this idea of the Soviet influence on Mao from 1949 to 1957. It's important to remember that the Soviet Union supported Mao since the 1920s, even when he wasn't in power, and continued to support him after he took power in 1949. They basically saw China as a Soviet or a communist brother in the world, I should say. And they do influence Mao a little bit. We talked about the ways in the last objective how Maoism was different, but here are some aspects that Mao actually supported in his concept of Maoism. The first one was the concept of land reform, or the idea of taking property from the rich and giving it to the poor. This was designed to increase productivity in the countryside. Another way that the Soviet Union influenced Mao was with the concept of civil reform, specifically setting up programs to deal with opium addiction problems that were happening in China and things along those lines. But one of the most important ones was to enhance women's rights and end arranged marriages, which seems a little odd for an authoritarian leader, but he wanted an egalitarian or an equal society. Now, this also meant getting rid of one of the most prominent ancient Chinese practices, that of foot binding. If you'll notice here in this picture, all of these women have very small feet. Now, this is called the lotus foot, L-O-T-U-S foot, and it created a certain type of walk called the lotus gait, G-A-I-T. Now, these women walking around in these tiny shoes, and this is really about as far as I want to go with this, would walk in a certain way that was very attractive to men in ancient times. The problem was how you made this kind of thing happen. In order to make this happen, you'd have to make this foot look more like these feet in order to fit into those tiny shoes. And that usually meant binding the foot from childhood to adulthood and tightening those bindings every time the foot started to get a little smaller, often to the point of breaking them. This was called Chinese foot binding, and it meant taking the smaller toes and folding them under the foot. Well, the answer is that you actually have to deform the foot until they basically looked like this. Now, that way they could fit into those smaller shoes. Now, there were other leaders, Sun Yat-sen and Chiang Kai-shek, who had banned the practice, but they really didn't have the means to keep track. People in the countryside were still doing it. Under more authoritarian rule with Mao, he was able to completely ban this practice and really enforce the policies that Chiang Kai-shek and Sun Yat-sen had come up with to begin with. Now, and one other thing as well is the 5-year plan. Mao gave himself a 5-year plan, like Stalin did in the Soviet Union, to collectivize agriculture and nationalize industry. But Mao had some of his own other ideas as well. The first one was the Great Leap Forward from 1958 to 1966. And this was designed to move away from Soviet influence and create a more egalitarian society once again. Now, mainly this was primarily economic goals, but it didn't really achieve much due to a lot of resistance within the bureaucracies of China. It had 4 equal parts. One was equal emphasis on industry and agriculture. Another was the mass mobilization of the workforce. A third one had to do with party workers, also known as cadres, C-A-D-R-E-S, running the government rather than the bureaucrats. And the fourth part was decentralization, meaning more government on local levels and less overall government control. It's widely debated whether or not this actually worked, but it actually created a series of famines. The other major component that Mao attempted was the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976, which was designed to promote political and social change that would supposedly purify all of China. The idea was that all principles of Maoism would be put in place, plus service to society, and the goal was to remove all parts of quote-unquote old China. Now, for this reason, scholars were sent to work, and universities and libraries were basically destroyed. Education created inequality in the eyes of Mao, and therefore education was de-emphasized. Again, the idea that it made people unequal in society. So an emphasis was placed on pretty much reading and writing and nothing else. Once again, most professors were sent to work, universities were destroyed. When Mao passed away, there were three groups who attempted to take control of China after he died in 1976. Now, post-Mao China is generally considered to be that time period, 1976 to the present. The first group that attempted to take control was led by a group of radicals that wanted drastic change, led by Mao's wife, Jiang Qing. It's, by the way, it's Jiang, J-I-A-N-G, and then Qing, Q-I-N-G. Now, Jiang was a former actress in China who decided she wanted to turn to politics after Mao passed away, from actress to empress, as it were. Now, the other group, the second group that wanted to control China, of course, in most of these situations, it holds true, is the military. And the third group was led by Zhou Enlai, who was second in command to Mao during the Long March back in his days, and second in command to Mao as he ruled China. Zhou Enlai led a group known as the Moderates. They were nowhere near as radical, did not want the radical changes that Mao's wife did, nor did they want to be as extremely conservative as the military wanted to be. They were kind of in the middle. They emphasized economic modernization. They wanted to get far more modern economically than they were, and yet limited contact with other countries. I'm not entirely sure how you pull that off, but that's what they wanted to do. Eventually, it's Zhou Enlai's group that's going to take control of China. But Zhou Enlai is also going to die shortly after Mao passes away, and that within a couple of years. And in 1978, the moderates select Deng Xiaoping to lead. Now, Deng Xiaoping had some pretty unique philosophies, and Deng Xiaoping would be in charge in China from 1978 to 1997. Deng basically led a dramatic turnaround of the Chinese economy. He decided to employ both socialist and capitalist methods to improve the economy. He didn't really care about if something was a capitalist method or a socialist method. He just wanted to pick something that he thought would be the best thing to use in kind of a mixed economy model. One of his most famous sayings was, "It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice." In other words, when it comes to the economy, if a socialist practice will work the best, let's use that. If a capitalist practice will work the best, let's use that. Deng also believed, and this is a very, very critical part of their history, Deng also believed in the four modernizations in China, that being industry, agriculture, science, and the military. He wanted to modernize in all four of those areas: industry, agriculture, science, and the military. And those four modernizations have been at the center of Chinese policy ever since. Deng's reforms have also included the idea of economic liberalization. No political liberalization, don't be wrong about that, no political liberalization, but very economic liberalization. Among these was the idea of the open door trade policy. Now, the open door trade policy was the idea of, in 1978, of trading with Western nations to get very much needed Western technology and investment, and eventually, as you can see here, joining the World Trade Organization. Prior to this policy, China mainly traded with the Soviet Union and just them only. But with the open door trading policy, China was willing to make nice with everybody. They were willing to trade with anyone, whether they be capitalist or socialist nations, anybody they needed to boost the economy and get along with the rest of the world to make sure that that happened. Deng's four modernizations also included education reform back to higher academic standards, a renewed focus of higher education and research within those higher education institutions, restoring the bureaucracy of old China, decentralizing the government to give more of the people a say in what's going on, including Tiger fans right there, and also increasing capitalist influence in China as well. Now, with this comes the idea of, again, not political liberalization, but very economic liberalization. The idea of taking more of a laissez-faire, hands-off approach, especially after seeing what had happened in Hong Kong under British rule. Hong Kong, with their 15% income tax rate and almost pure economic freedoms, and making it really easy to open a business there with a form that could be filled out in one day and you could start a business the next day. Hong Kong was flourishing in only 50 years. Hong Kong had been a mountainside of shacks in the 1950s, and now they were succeeding. Well, China looked at that and really didn't want to disrupt that model. So in 1991, the first McDonald's opens in Beijing, and eventually, by 1997, Hong Kong is returned to China from the British, and the Chinese get really intrigued by some of the capitalist ideas that were going on there, and frankly, start moving in that direction to a degree. But in 1997, Deng Xiaoping would pass away, and he's replaced by Jiang Zemin. Now, Deng Xiaoping's influence is still in China today, but ever since 1998, any ideas of political liberalization have been officially squashed. The China Democracy Party was banned from China in 1998, and since Mao's death, the Politburo has remained the legitimate source of power. Now, the Politburo, those guys you saw on the stage and right here as well, is still, it's the Communist Party essentially, and it's still very corrupt and basically irrelevant to the people. It holds authoritarian power over an increasingly market-based economy. And since that time, and even before that time, going back into 1989, rebellion has often been spoke of, even in Deng's time, especially after the Tiananmen Square crisis of 1989, where protests led to the military coming out and trying to squash the rebellion. The military today is still a very strong influence in China, as China, as we mentioned before, has a very powerful military. But they also have political influences in the government as the Central Military Commission, helping out with decisions with the Politburo is there as well and having a very strong influence. That has also led, as China has become bigger and stronger and more important, that has also led to the Chinese military becoming prominent around the world with various countries. But I think the biggest thing when you look at China's political and economic history, it's not necessarily about the politics or the political freedom that matters to the Chinese, although it does matter to other nations, human rights violations and freedoms for their people. But what matters to China the most, and where they're succeeding the most, is in their economics. China is without a doubt an economic world power today, and in their history, those political and economic changes is debatable whether they've made a difference or not. But you can't argue with the economic success that China is currently experiencing, especially as it relates to the United States. Okay, thanks for listening.